A brief word of thanks before I start. Nobody is fully responsible for themselves. Nobody makes themselves by themselves. And to my friends and family and colleagues and mentors who have, to quote the great Mr. Rogers, loved me into being, thank you. How old are you? The question embarrassed me. I was working at a nursing home as a student chaplain. The woman sitting in front of me, I'll call her Margaret, was well into her 80s. I felt hot in my ill-fitting sports coat. I had bought it wanting to look professional for my job, perhaps to avoid the question of whether I was seasoned enough to give comfort to my elders. Margaret saw through all of that. How old are you? Sheepishly, I told her. 25? Her eyes lit up. Her face stretched into a smile somewhere between loving and condescending. "Oh," she said, "you're just a baby." And she wasn't wrong. I was young enough to be her grandson, but I didn't want to be her grandson. I wanted to be her rabbi. To grow as a person so often requires that other people play along and see us the way we see ourselves. But this can be an even greater challenge than growing in the first place. I suspect that many of us have had similar experiences, maybe of visiting family and suddenly feeling like we're teenagers again, quickly finding ourselves occupying the same role we might have had as children, our families lovingly shoving us into the same box we've occupied since always. The roles we've taken on are concretized by friend groups, working relationships, and households who are all invested in a vision of us which doesn't change. And we do the same thing. We ourselves are invested in seeing other people as unchanging. Stable relational systems form for a reason and are difficult to shift once settled. But God doesn't see it that way. And in Parshat Vayera, the Parsha whose name means sight, I believe we are called to look at each other from God's point of view. In the narrative, Isaac has just been born and weaned. Ishmael has done some unknown act which made Sarah unhappy, and he and his mother Hagar have been exiled into the desert. Hagar has done this sort of desert survival before, but this time is different. This time she's got a yeled. Yeled, baby, is the word the Torah uses in every interaction Hagar has with Ishmael. While that word is often simply used to mean a young child, I think in this case baby does a better job capturing how Ishmael is seen by Hagar, as we'll see, as someone unable to fend for himself or even move on his own. Hagar carries her yeled out of the camp, wandering from nowhere to no place. Hagar runs out of water. In a fit of desperation, she leaves her yeled under a bush and runs away, crying, "Let me not look upon the yeled as he dies." It's heartbreaking. When Hagar looks at Ishmael, she can see only a yeled, a helpless baby. But God has a different point of view. To God, Ishmael has become a na'ar, a lad, a teen, a candidate for adulthood. He's 16 after all. When Abraham expelled them, God told him not to worry about Hagar and the na'ar. And here, at the brink of death, when God sends an angel that will save Hagar and Ishmael, the angel tells Hagar that, quote, God has heard the voice of the na'ar where he is. Ki shma Elohim et kol hana'ar ba'asher hu sham. God has heard the voice of the na'ar where he is. We hear again God affirm that Ishmael is a na'ar, but perhaps more importantly, we learn for the first time that he had a voice at all. In the narrative, so focused on Hagar's perspective, we never heard Ishmael's voice calling out to God. It wasn't mentioned in the Torah text. a Yeled can't talk. It is only when this angel reports that God heard Ishmael the Na'ar that we hear him too. God is prodding us and Hagar to see and listen to Ishmael as he has become. No longer a baby, but someone who prays and God listens to. Now, says God to Hagar, just as I am with this Na'ar where he is, be with him there too. Go retrieve the Na'ar from where you left him. Take him by the hand. He's ready. Quote, then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and let the Na'ar drink. When God opens Hagar's eyes, she finally sees Ishmael the Na'ar. When Ishmael was a helpless Yeled, Hagar was alone in her struggle for survival on the brink of death. Now, seeing what God sees, Hagar understands that the well is not her only salvation. Hagar is no longer alone. Her eyes have been opened to the young man her baby has become. A person who prays prayers she cannot hear and fights battles he can win on his own, who has a will and a future. In the next verse, nearly the next verb, Ishmael grows up, Yigdal, maturing past even the Na'ar that God saw and believed in. Hagar, freed from her former restrictive vision, gets him married, and their family thrives. In our efforts to become the people we want to be, know that God sees us. God is with us where we are and where we're trying to go. To be a religious person, a person who listens to God's voice and walks in God's ways, is to listen to other people's voices, to walk with them on their journeys, to see who they are trying to become, to take them seriously, to give them the dignity of self-definition. Back at the nursing home, sitting across from a baby, wearing a damp, ill-fitting, and ill-advised sports coat, Margaret had a choice. She could see me as a Yeled, beneath taking seriously, and stop there, leaving herself alone against the world. Or she could try to see the way that God sees, a person in the process of becoming. And in that moment, Margaret chose to open up, to see me where I was and the rabbi I want to become. She spoke to me about her life and her fears, her needs and her disappointments. She allowed me to be a rabbi, to be her rabbi. By seeing me this way, Margaret was no longer sitting across from a baby with nothing to offer her. By choosing to see me, Margaret was no longer alone. We have this choice as well. We can choose in every one of our relationships to listen carefully, to play along, to see ourselves and others through God's eyes, to take each other seriously, to be less alone, to allow one another to become what God sees. Thank you. Kaddish Rabbanan, it's on page 13. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה. ועמד דברה קירותי והמליך מלכותי וחייכון ויומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי תלמידי הון ועל כל מן דעסקין באורייתא די ואתרא הדין ודי בכל אתר ואתר. יהי להון ולכון שלמה רבה חינה וחיסדה ורחמין וחיין אריכין ומזונה רוויחה ומפורקנה מקודם אבוהון דבי שמיה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. או עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא ברחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.